Welcome to Like No Other, Unlocking the Value Only Your Experience Can Provide, part of the Rutgers Business School Signature Leadership Series. Today's webinar is generously sponsored by Tech United NJ, previously known as the Tech Council of New Jersey. Tech United NJ empowers innovators, entrepreneurs, and instigators. To learn more, visit their website, techunited.co. Generous corporate sponsors, promotional partners such as Tech United NJ, and individual contributors are coming together to help our students by raising awareness and funds for the 1,000 Laptop Challenge. Our semester has begun with remote instruction. Can you imagine attending your classes and doing all of your schoolwork online without a computer? This is a real struggle for some of our students. How can you help, you ask? Please consider making a donation to the 1,000 Laptop Challenge Fund. Also, please check with your employer. Your company may have a charitable arm or they may match your gift. Kindly watch for the email that will follow this webinar so you'll have a direct link to the donation page for the 1,000 Laptop Challenge Fund. We thank you in advance for being a part of this important initiative. Here to facilitate today's discussion and help us get to know Ed McNamara better is Assistant Professor of Professional Practice and Associate Dean of Executive Education at Rutgers Business School, Peter Methot. With his Executive Ed hat on, Peter is responsible for the strategic and operational activities related to both professional and corporate education here at RBS. As a faculty member, he teaches both full classes and seminars in a variety of marketing topics. Peter is actively involved in the most prestigious industry association for executive education, currently serving on the board of directors for the International University Consortium for Executive Education, and since that's hard to say, we call it UNICON. He also consults for other academic institutions by instructing how to implement their transitions to digital. And Peter is a proud alumnus of Rutgers Business School's Executive MBA program. Peter, I'm going to let you take it from here.
Well, thank you, Margaret, and thank you, Ed, for being with us, and to all the people that are joining us for today's session. Let me first start with, we call it the Signature Leadership Series, but why? Under the leadership of Dean Lay, we've really established these 4 guiding principles, which will be sort of the underpinning of our conversation today with Ed and with kind of past and future senior leaders. In sort of simple language, the 4 R's are on the screen in front of you. The first one being resilience. We really talk about how at Rutgers Business School we have developed leaders who are gritty and resilient, right? So that's our first R. The second one, resourceful. This idea of how to be creative and collaborative in solving problems. Responsibility, that we have a strong ethical backbone in decision making. And then last, this idea of reinvention, that throughout our lives, we need to continue to reinvent our skills, our capabilities, and just have a mindset for continued growth and learning. So those would be our 4 underpinnings for our dialogue today between myself and Ed. Let me just, before I kick us off, let me just talk briefly. So you heard us mention that Ed is Senior Director of Marketing Communications at SHI. SHI, interestingly, if you are from the local area now over the past several months, you'll see SHI all over our stadium, because now SHI is a partner at Rutgers, but it's also probably one of those names that not everybody knows. So let me just briefly talk about SHI. So SHI is a primary provider of technology products and services, headquartered right here in Somerset, New Jersey. And proudly, they employ hundreds and hundreds of Rutgers alums, which, again, just solidifies how closely we work together. SHI is recognized as one of North America's largest providers of IT solutions, now with over 5,000 employees. And that's just exponential growth since its founding in 1989. And that's, again, part of the backbone that we're going to talk about today. So Ed, as you can see in his bio, was of the first 100 employees at SHI. And so he has certainly been there and been strategically involved with some of that very tremendous growth over the year. Ed reports directly to the CEO and founder, Tai Lee, And again, seeing and being involved since the beginning, Ed's going to kind of share not only his journey, but some of the lessons learned along the way. So Ed, welcome and thank you for your time today. We're really excited to have you with us.
Peter, thanks for the invitation. I really appreciate it. It's good to be here.
So we've had the opportunity to sort of talk a bit in sort of preparation for our conversation today, and I thought it might be fun way to just to sort of, again, you now wear the hat of Director of Marketing Communications, but there were seeds planted earlier in your life, right, that sort of evolved into that current role. But I think it might be fun to kind of talk about some of the early start, right? Maybe as you described it to me, the impact of the Sunday morning paper, and sort of how that started your mindset and your path forward and your skills. So if you mind starting there, just sharing sort of the early part of Ed, and we'll kind of go from there.
Yeah, no, I definitely, like you said, I've been at SHI since June 16th, 1997, and got to the position I am in now as just being a writer at heart. Like I literally wrote my way into this position, which didn't exist. So kind of had to create that. But we can get to that, because if you're gonna say that you're a writer at heart, I run a creative team, but I'm not a graphic designer. I think I have an opinion of what looks good. My graphic designers, might think otherwise sometimes, but without their help, I couldn't do it. So, but where does that writing background comes from? And from my earliest memories, I remember I was just very lucky to grow up in a household where, reading, education, and the Sunday morning newspaper was among the most important things. I can remember being in the car. Now this is going to be like a total back in my day type of thing, but pre-internet, you would actually, we would go to church in the morning, and then we would go on the Odyssey to pick up at least 3 different Sunday morning papers. It was usually the Asbury Park Press, the New York Daily News, and the New York Times, right? So, and if you were lucky, you went to one place and they had all 3. If you were unlucky, I can remember going from place to place because we weren't going home until all 3 had been acquired, So, just seeing the importance that was placed on that, like we're literally going from church. It's like, so you can see the priorities where they are right there. It's like church, newspapers, home to read the papers. So to have that kind of background and be lucky enough to have that kind of set the stage for having a communications background, for start. But it's, and that was the start of it all.
And to that point, Ed, again, I think it's important to remember that accumulation of knowledge, right, is that there's lots of different ways that we accumulate knowledge, right? There's active, right? We're all looking for it, and some of it is passive. And some of the learning, again, from our conversation, happened as part of the journey, right? I'm gonna cue up. You started in let's call it the active role of college, and then you had some twists along the way. Maybe you could talk a bit about that for us, about how it's quite okay to be not a perfect linear path.
Yeah, well, I wrote down the word gritty that you said before. I'm like, okay, here's where we get to the gritty part, right? Now it's called a gap year. Back when I did it, it was called dropping out of college, right? So gap year is way better. And I have a young cousin who did a gap year in Hawaii and Australia. Like, well, I really didn't think of that, right? In high school, I could probably be classified as an underachieving, distracted student. I was interested in a lot of other things going on, but maybe not necessarily what was the curriculum would dictate, right? So when I got to college, at the time being at 18 years old, it really wasn't for me, and I had already spent a couple of summers working, for those of you from New Jersey, down on the boardwalk in Wildwood, New Jersey, and I worked there in the summertime as I started as a ride operator and then became a manager, managing the ride operators, this is talking 16, or 17, 18, 19 years old. And when I dropped out of school, I said, well, why don't I, stay on over the winter? And if I'm not going to school, I'm certainly going to have to be earning a living. And let's see what this is all about. So that winter, the big project was that a new roller coaster was being delivered, and among all the other things that were happening that winter, we were tasked with putting it together. So if you can imagine in the island of North Wildwood, Crest, there's 200,000 people on any given day in the summertime, and in the winter there's about 6,000, 7,000, maybe a bit more than that. So it's a very, very different environment, things clear out, and the job was this roller coaster comes and gets basically laid out all along the beach, and it's our job to put it together like a jigsaw puzzle. And it was easily one of the more interesting positions I've ever held.
Absolutely. So what was the insight there? Do we decide that construction might not be the future path for you?
So one thing that's very fortunate that's followed me throughout my career path is that I fell in with a group of really great people. And for anybody who's worked construction out there, there's no such thing as as complaining up the chain to to HR or things like that. Like, things get said in a very direct manner. And
Yes.
About halfway through that winter, some people that I had become really close with had no problem telling me how terrible I was at doing this job. Right? I learned a ton, but at the same time, turns out I'm not all that mechanically inclined. And it also turns out that these guys were really good at what they did. I mean, if you think about what they're doing, like they're taking something from scratch and putting it together, and everything has to meet at the top. There's no spare parts. There's no do-overs. Like, you have to there's an engineering aspect to it, and there's a lot. There's math in it. There's a lot of really complex things that you have to do, and what was I was the kind of one of the grunts that said, we need piece A319. It's on the beach over there somewhere. Let us know when you find it. And I can tell you how cold it is out there. Nothing will get you back into college than actually wandering the beach in the wintertime. So, long story short, I definitely learned I still didn't know where I wanted to go, but I knew where I didn't want to go. Right. So when I went back I remember calling my parents and saying, like, I think I might have to come up with another plan. And I started initially back in community college, in Monmouth. That's Brookdale, and school was very easy after that.
Yeah, it was. It's important. I think in this we call this the accumulation of knowledge, right? Knowing what you like to do and what you could do less of, right, is an important part of the process.
I could check one off the list right away.
Yeah. So maybe walk us forward a few steps, and maybe how you made your way into SHI, right? What that next sort of phase of your life was like.
So going back to school, knowing that I just had an inclination for writing, I was interested in taking as much writing as possible, as much literature, much writing, as little math and science as possible. But therefore the communication/journalism major. And right in my last year of college, I started writing for the Press of Atlantic City, which is the daily newspaper that covers the South Jersey coastline. And was covering high school sports. That's how you get your foot in the door, and literally going to games and covering the stories. And I learned a lot about what it takes to write under deadline. Under that, I have very vivid memories of coming back and having the games happen at night, and your deadline is the editor says, I need that by 10:15. You look at the clock, it's 9:45, and you haven't put your statistics together yet. So you're going to get to the point really quickly. And then when I first started, I can remember standing behind the editors, and this one editor, Phil Chapin, was really taught me a lot. He said, when I edit your story, stand behind me and watch what I do. He goes, keep doing that over and over again. And I sent him the first story about a Lenape soccer match, and it was terrible. Like, I mean, he ripped it to shreds. And things were going in different places. His fingers were flying around. My words are moving. I had a paragraph that I absolutely loved. He's like, highlight, delete, and I was like, wait, that's amazing. Wow. He's like, no, it's not amazing. Like, and he's like, we got a paper to put out, and every paper it's the lesson learned. Every newspaper is as good as it can be at the time of deadline, right? And you learn you very quickly learn what's important, what's staying, what's going. And after you stand behind him 5 times, 6 times, he's like, he's like, yeah, this is getting better, So, and then by like maybe the 12th time you do that, Phil at one point went, and I was like, that's what I'm looking for. I told him something that he didn't know, and I was like, okay, we're on our way. But I've never forgotten what it's like to work under deadline and how it helps you actually prioritize what's important, and took that with me going forward, right? So, needless to say, the newspaper, it was 1996, and newspapers were, their budgets were stretched about as far as they were going to go. So I started just going on interviews, and one of the positions was with a company called Software House International. So I wasn't quite sure what they did, but I answered an ad in the Newark Star Ledger, and came up for an interview, and I interviewed with Denise Radicchio, she was in HR at the time. She's now head of our public sector business, which is a huge part of our business, and had a fantastic conversation, and got a FedEx letter in the mail to start as an inside sales position. So I was like, this is the first post college job. I'm not really sure what it's all about, but on Monday at 8:30 in the morning, I'm going to be in Somerset, New Jersey, it seems like.
And again, you started off in sales, and my recollection is you found some success, but had some lessons along the way.
Yeah, I started out at inside sales, covering a territory we were broken up by state back then, and I was inside sales, which means there was somebody who was it was Colorado. There was somebody out in Denver who was meeting with customers in person. And I remember she went on maternity leave, and I was covering for her, and I remember that I lost one of our. So I thought I was doing well, and I lost one of our best customers because I made a decision that I didn't want to eat a mistake. I actually shipped them, or I still don't think I shipped it, but the wrong product was shipped, and I said, well, like, we kind of agreed to this, and I don't think I can eat this $8,000 mistake, and the customer was basically said, okay, well, it turns out that they weren't going to do business with us anymore, and it was clearly the biggest mistake I had ever made in my very young career. I remember the customer. I remember it was Western Gas was the customer. I remember Dan Georgiopoulos was the guy. It was 20 years ago, and I remember it like it was yesterday. But so I thought I was in real trouble. But it turns out that at SHI, especially then, I truly thought I was making the right decision on behalf of SHI and the customer. I disagree with the decision that I made now, but in terms of any discipline, basically I was in a sales position, so they said, okay, well, you've got to make up that difference now, and it was all part of a learning experience. But from inside sales, I went, had a couple of different almost career path changes. Went from inside sales to licensing, where I really learned the business, software licensing. For people who aren't in IT, I mean, that is really how the business of IT, gets done. There, with the stroke of a pen, multi-year agreements giving you access to any and all kinds of IT to deploy throughout your enterprise is how it gets done. So I really learned the business there, and then I went into outside sales. And I actually really liked outside sales because I really liked meeting with customers. I liked going on site. I liked hearing their issues, and I liked traveling. I went to a number of different places, but my main customer that I was supporting at the time was a company called MCI WorldCom, and they were down. At least the group I was dealing with was down in Alpharetta, and really had a great run in supporting that customer. Unfortunately, MCI WorldCom had some very well publicized accounting issues. And I remember driving to work one day and hearing that they had overstated their revenues by about $11 billion, which is a bit more than a rounding error, right? So as I just walked right, so I heard that on the radio, and I walked into the building, and I walked right into Ty's office, right? Like, so Ty Lee, our we were about maybe 500 or 600 people at that point, so still very small. Ty sat in the middle of our licensing group, and when I appeared at her door, she looked up from the desk and just started laughing, because she's like, I guess you heard the news, And I was like, yeah. And she said, well, come here, sit down, like, let's talk about what we're going to do, right? So I didn't know what to think because she had left it. What I would find out years later is that when there are things that happen well beyond our control, Ty has a fantastic ability to laugh, because there's nothing we could do about that, right? But so she laughed and literally said, but on things where we make a mistake, meaning SHI or something we could have done, she's laser focused, right? So there's no laughing then, because that's something that's within our control. Our business, we have to partner with, we partner with the Microsofts and all of the household names of IT in both hardware and software. We have distribution warehouses. We need a really large and diverse partnership network, and a lot of things are beyond our control. So we've got to remain laser focused on what we can control. And what she said then was okay, they're going to declare bankruptcy, which they did. She said, everybody's going to turn their back on them and they're not going to extend credit. We are going there. She goes, they're not going to go out of business. We're going to stand by them. And that is what because that's, number one, the right thing to do. And number two, we're going to have a better relationship with them than ever before. And I started to think I might have been, and as the next 2 years that played out, it's exactly what happened. Sometimes I think I'm in Ty's, Groundhog Day. I'm like, she's going through this for the first time too, right? It's like, no, she already knew how that was going to play out, and already had the plan for what we were going to do. And the loyalty and the relationships that allowed us to build was fantastic.
It's an interesting insight that you brought up a few times there, and I want to draw it out, because again, as we talk about RBS's core values, it really seems that Ty and SHI has a real set of core values, right? There seems to be a real strong focus around the customer and service, right? They could be one word. You could say customer service is one thing, but I think there's almost two things that happen there. It's this sort of focus on how to serve the customer, then how do you service them as well as can be possibly done. And I wonder if you could talk about that, about this idea of rallying the group, the team, right? That's really going through explosive growth over those years, over those several decades, around those core values, and how that impacted the culture, the organization in its journey.
Yeah, and we had a huge advantage because we were in the middle. We had just completed 5 consecutive years of 100% growth, right? And when you're having that kind of growth, it's basically all hands on deck. Back in the day when we used to get purchase orders coming over on the printer was running all day long because customers needed what we were providing. So I always say to people who are like, well, I don't know if I'm into a sales position. Well, there's tens of millions of salespeople out there, and all of the best ones help people accomplish things. So Ty's attitude is, and we also have another advantage. So that growth allowed us to keep expanding, keep reinvesting in the business. And that's one thing that SHI constantly does. We don't have to report numbers to Wall Street. We don't have to hit a quarterly number. We can take what we've done and we could reinvest in the business and actually make it a better experience. So our ability to do that, it kind of helps you prioritize. Whereas if you have to make a business decision, if that business decision is founded on what is best for the long-term mutually beneficial relationship between the customer and us, we can do that, and we can do it for over a long period of time without having to worry about other stakeholders. It's basically SHI, the customer, our partners. If it's working for all of us, you're just gonna like coming to work every day, because when it's not working, it's not fun.
And to that, again, in our sort of conversations, your access and mentorship from Ty, I think, has been sort of a very impactful piece of your growth leadership story. I wonder if you might share about that, because there's a couple sides to this, right? I want to sort of say what we've talked about, in the sense that because it is held outside of the Wall Street walls, right? she can be very involved, and so you have a lot of access to her experience, to her leadership, and I assume that a lot of that trickles down to you. And I was wondering if you could talk about that a bit, about what it's like to have a really strong mentor in your life, and sort of guiding your path.
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about that. So Ty is very proud of the fact that her direct reports average about 18 years average tenure at SHI, and we have a huge advantage with that because a lot of us came up holding. I mean, I was talking about I started inside sales, went to licensing, went to outside sales, and then formed our marketing department. I should say after MCI WorldCom actually became Verizon Business, and then we had a big Verizon team. So Ty kind of said to me, we really need to consolidate our message. Like SHI was a lot of folks, a lot of salespeople, a lot of sales teams who were supporting customers, but we didn't really have anyone really telling a cohesive message or a consistent one. Depending on who you spoke to, you might get some different figures or different depending on what their strengths was, they were probably more likely to lead with that than what the companies were. So to be able to have her say to me, you're the best writer in our sales force, and I think it's time that we should consider forming a communications department and making it at minimum a consistent message, a streamlined message, and one that'll resonate with customers. Let's get that started. And I said, how will we do that? And she goes, well, that's your job. She goes, let's have a meeting a week from now, and you come back and tell me how we're going to do that. And I remember going back to my desk and basically just panicking. And but I basically went back and said, we're at minimum. I've managed people before. I'm a solid writer. So I'm going to need to get some good communicators around me, and we're going to write our way out of this thing. So and that's basically what we did. But having her support, I mean, the one thing that I'm really thankful for is that being a private, I would have never been given that opportunity at a large public company without having that previous experience. So when I mentioned about Ty's direct reports having coming in like I did, we learned the business from the bottom up. So when I was in inside sales, I was shipping product to customers, I was thinking about is this the right technology? How is it going to get there? What am I charging from freight? I was thinking about freight costs, in terms of our margins are slim in this business, so you've got to get everything right. I was having an understanding at the very grassroots level of our business. So people have worked together for 20 years and have that institutional knowledge, and somebody in marketing communications or marketing events or accounting or other places, have a knowledge of the company from the ground up that I think is fairly unique.
So we've touched on that a little bit in our conversation. You talked about how SHI does a great job of just getting people, cross-functional experience, right? Making sure people see the whole business versus just their single line or their single focus area. And I'd like to talk about that on kind of a broad perspective, not just about SHI, but around how important that was, not only for you, but as you see other people coming up in the company, to have broad experience, but also to have depth of knowledge. So it's the depth versus width sort of conversation as part of a leadership journey.
Yeah, and I think that's where the value comes in, right? Because when I think about people who we hire a lot. You mentioned we have 350 plus RU grads at SHI. And we're only 5 or 7 miles off campus, but a lot of them are not necessarily business majors. I mean, we're hiring people for sales positions from every discipline. For 6 years, I had my best when I was in outside sales, my best inside sales rep that was with me for all those 6 years was a music major, and but had the previous experience. And if you go to my LinkedIn profile, which is not nearly as built out as it should be for somebody in a marketing position or a communications position, but if you go to my profile, I very proudly still have, and I think this is what started our conversation, I have that that amusement park experience, that you know, the newspaper experience. And when people are coming to SHI, you know, your immediate value through the door is going to be low, right? So I want to see, you know, and this is where that, you know, that unique experience that everybody has. I want to see what you did before this, you know, and if you can think about like what your resume looks like when you're just a recent grad and coming out, it's hard to show value. But if you can show that you have the characteristics that we're looking for, you know, from the team environment, you show that there's, you know, that the hard work, you know, like one of the R's that you guys have is responsible. You know, I kind of check that one off really quickly because I'm like, that's the easiest one to address because that's the baseline, right? Like that's the minimum, you know, and then we'll go up from there. So I really enjoy when I sit down and talk, you know, whether it's new grads or people that have been in position for a year or two. I really like go to the bottom of the resume and say like tell me what you learned, you know, from that particular job, because I know I learned a lot from the other positions that I've had that have absolutely nothing to do with this. And I want to see what characteristics that you're bringing here, because you're going to have value. If you start working here and you put in your time, we are going to build up the value that you can provide. But I want to know what you're bringing through the door right now. And the only way I can do that is to find out where you got it from.
It's really interesting, Ed. Let me fast forward a little bit here because I think it's important. It connects to some of the core values that we're talking about in leadership, and I want to bring it into contextualize it to right now, right? I mean, you know, current state, right? The global pandemic, things really shut down, put a lot of challenges, right, in not only our business operations but as leaders. And I wonder if you could share anything that's happening right now that has really challenged maybe not only you but the organization, just to have to sort of pause and think about what's next, right? And then I'm pulling on the resilience R here because I think that's kind of what we're all feeling right now. We're feeling stretched and challenged and forced to rethink. And I'm curious if there's anything that jumps out to you right now that is causing that pause.
Yeah, I watch the news like you know, read the paper obviously, like just like everybody else. And when I read about, you know, the unemployment situation, and I really get a pause there because I'm like, I feel like myself and my team are working harder than we ever have. Like this is without question been, you know, the hardest that we've worked over an 8-month like period of time. And you know, people, they can't go anywhere. People aren't taking vacation. There's these releases. So you know, in order to be able to keep up the pace that you know we've needed to move at, it's been challenging. And you know, my biggest concern, I mean, I think if you hire well, you know, you almost have to identify those employees where it's like, hey, you know, like you need to take you know, you got to take some time. Like I need you can't, and I've got to remember that for myself, you know. So I think, you know, across the organization, our business, like we you know, in some challenging times, we just closed our last quarter and grew 6%, you know, and we've been growing, you know, throughout this year because the demand for IT, especially hardware with work from home, has been pretty huge. And we've really been in an all hands on deck situation to answer that. But while we're having that level of business, you know, over the course of a weekend, we transitioned 94% of our workforce to work from home. So Friday we were in the office, you know, Monday you're working from home. And by the way, don't forget about the guys in the warehouse and integration center who don't have that right. So you know, communication, all of a sudden, you know, communication became, you know, pretty paramount. And you know, we're working on some messaging, and the thing that I keep repeating over and over again is that you can't tell people, and by people I'm gonna focus internally now. I'm gonna talk like employees. You can't tell people how to feel about something. Like, you know, like you make a policy, like you know, you understand feedback, you understand different positions, you make a policy, but don't tell somebody how to feel about something. Like explain your position and explain, you know, why we need to do the things that we're doing, you know, in order to sustain a viable business, to service customers, and to keep employees and partners safe, you know. So but just, you know, and you have to pull upon, your years. You've got to have some money in the bank with your employees that are like, okay, like I trust that what's being said is what's, is what's right in terms of, when are we working from home? When is a good time to go back to the office? And what kind of culture do we have in terms of, are we going to be an at-home company for the foreseeable future? Because our entire 30-year history has very much been in an in-office culture. So communication is huge, and just respecting both decisions that are made, and then how people might feel about that is extremely important.
Yeah, because it was occurring to me as we were kind of going through that, Ed, you guys have been going at warp speed, right, for years and years, right? You just have seen tremendous growth, but then you overlay that with sort of the added stresses of being working families and non-traditional schedules, right? You might be working at odd hours a night. How do you find that balance of going really high speed and also working sort of all over the place, right? I mean, I would be concerned. I know I'm concerned about my team. It's how do you continue to give them, to be their rock, and to give them sort of a sense of security, and to prevent burnout, right? Because I think that's what we're all worried about now, is how long can we keep this pace up? And so I'm just wondering what your thoughts are about that, around how do we find and make sure that we're not really hurting ourselves for the long term.
Yeah, the burnout issue is, I kind of, I've had a couple of one-on-ones with employees this week who are saying, I think, and especially with managers on my team, who are saying, I think people are looking at the calendar and finally, seeing a light at the end of the tunnel, which is year end. So as a communications team, that we have a lot of vacation time that's been accumulating, because simply people are like, well, you start to value your time off a little differently when it's like, how can I spend that time? So I'm not going to be taking my normal October trip or whatever that might be. So I think that I'm kind of happy at the fact that, like, we're in Q4 of the calendar year, and I can feel, and I've gotten feedback from managers that it feels like employees are like, okay, like, we put our heads down and got this far. If we can get to that, in my mind, I've got that line of demarcation. I said, we've pretty much got to get everything that we want to get done for this year done by Thanksgiving, right? Because we're going to need some time off. And I think it's not just us. I think, we're trying to partner. We're trying to get our message out to customers and people who, might not know everything that we have to offer or our value to them. So, I do believe that from a burnout perspective, people are kind of looking at the calendar and like, okay, I think there's a light. It's still way in the distance, but I think we're going to get there. I'm kind of feeling that myself, but really it's empathy. I personally, I don't, my wife and I don't have any children, but there are many of the people. We have a 30-person team, and many on my team do. And I had an employee say to me one time, said, I was just like, thank you for just really understanding how stressful this is for, what we have to do at home. And I said, well, I don't really understand, but like, it looks really hard to me, so like, they say, well, you don't have kids, so you don't really know. I'm like, actually, I don't have them, and it looks really hard to me. So I'm going to pretty much get whatever resources you need to make that happen, because I actually not knowing might make me a little bit more empathetic. At least I hope so, anyway.
That's really interesting. Yeah, no, it's figuring it out as we go, right? It's that's sort of the challenge, right, of leadership today, is that it is ever changing. Trying to predict, never mind next year, what happens, this quarter, next quarter. So
we're off the charts right now, and everybody is, and that brings a level of stress. And and also, I mean, not to get political, but there's a big election that is coming up, and I was reading some statistics where I think something like 47% of Americans were saying that like following the upcoming election has disrupted them at work in one way or another. And I was like, wow, I didn't know it would be quite that high in it. I think Gartner ran that survey, if I'm not mistaken. So it was really interesting, and it's not a political thing. That's a universal, So it was also, so there's a lot that's been we've been handed a lot to handle, and I generally think people are actually doing really well, all things considered.
Yeah, well, I want to go back to come forward for a second here, Ed, and we're starting to get some questions coming in, so I'm gonna go over to them in a second here. But
yeah,
we talked a bit about I used the analogy from my father. My father always talked about trying to put as many tools in my toolkit, right? To the more tools you have, the more decisions and more choices you can make. And so I wanted to go back and just have you reflect for a second on what are some of the best tools that you've put in your toolkit at different parts in your career, right? Are there the early tools, right, that you learned about hard work, around communication and knowing your audience, to people skills, right? What are some of the big things that you saw as critical to your path along the way?
I think what's really critical. I mean, I'll take it in two different parts. Just like the whole like writing aspect just comes from, you know, it just having a generally inquisitive mind, and it just like that was a gift, and I'm extremely grateful for that. And just you know, I drive my wife crazy sometimes. We'll walk across the Brooklyn Bridge, and I'm like, who built this? You know, and like she knows a book is coming from Amazon, and like, you know, the next week or so. But you know, so there's you know, there's that aspect of it. But I also think that you have to identify ways that you can provide value to others, you know, and you can't think that somebody, you know, in the workplace is thinking about like how, you know, what, you know, Ty is running an $11 billion company right now. She's not like, what can I do for Ed McNamara right now? You know, what I need to constantly be doing is saying like, hey, by the way, like, you know, I think we should be doing this. I think I mean, I had one of my employees, you know, took it upon herself and her team to start a podcast, which we hadn't done before. And, you know, said like, here's all the reasons why we should be doing that and featuring, you know, some IT thought leaders in this medium. And it's like, yeah, absolutely. And it was like, that is something that I wasn't considering, but is I have every confidence going to be a home run for us. So like, that's the value. When I just think you have to be proactive. I started the marketing team because we actually changed our intranet, and I said, you know, it would be a great idea, you know, and it was basically just like, you know, here's where the spreadsheets are, here's price lists, here's partner, you know, things like that, the real tools of that drive us being able to answer things. And I said, what if we just put like, we shared our wins, you know, like on this on the cover of this intranet, and what if we did it in a way that was just kind of fun? Like we called on one customer for 16 years, and finally they gave us business, and they said the same person called me for 16 years. I had to give them business, and I'm like, well, this is perfect. That's the same amount of time it took Andy Dufresne to dig out of his cell in the Shawshank Redemption. I'm like, that's gonna be the tie-in, you know. So like at the end of the day, there's sometimes I'm like, I don't know if you guys know, but software volume licensing can be a little dry topic, you know. So like if I could bring value, so if I could bring it, it's a page turner, I'm telling you. But if I could bring some value to, you know, what these, you know, the job that these people are doing, like having them understand, like, you know, here's how we won at that customer, here's the value we provided to them, like they can do the same. And, you know, so basically the task of our, you know, salespeople is you have to identify, like SHI could do any number of different things. We could do everything, you know, under the IT spectrum. But if it doesn't matter to that customer, if it's not valuable to them, then like you're just wasting their time. Like you have to understand what they need, when they need it, and understand like how you can deliver that and run a viable business. You know, so I'm really fortunate that you know, I'm just seem to naturally be in line, you know, aligned with that in terms of, you know, you have to identify like, you know, what if there's a I'm a movie quoter, so sorry, but that movie Up in the Air, when Jason Bateman says, you know, it's not a problem unless you have a solution, right? So and it's kind of true. It's like if you don't have a solution, it just is what it is, right? You know, so when you actually come up with the solution, like a lot of times you're the one that's like, great, you came up with the solution, you're adding value by solving that problem, and now you know, you're going to be the one that's going to go and do it and get some great results. So you really got to identify, like I said, I think people genuinely want people that are great employees to succeed. But to people who are entering the workforce now, like, you don't think that your boss is sitting around thinking about how to do that for you, because they've probably got a lot of other things going on.
That's a great point. It's a great point. Coming with not just problems, but solutions, right? I mean, being solutions oriented is a really powerful thing. It's easy for us to lose perspective sometimes with that.
Yep.
So we got an interesting one here. Looks like somebody that you worked with. So a gentleman named Ray, who said, great job, Ed. Apparently you started off at SHI together. What do you think were your greatest assets that have made you so successful at SHI, and your relationship with Ty?
I know Ray, and I miss Ray. I remember. I know Ray. That's great to hear from him. Sorry, it's just I'm thinking about Ray now, so that's great. No, I think that in terms of Ty definitely empowers people to make decisions, and I think that, like I said, that ability to make a decision and to know that you're gonna that the people higher up on the chain are going to have your back, as long as that if you're logical and reasoning out the decisions that you're making and doing what you think is right, for the customer and for the company, like you might make a decision that's not as good as another one you could have done. You might have had an idea that somebody else might have handled it in a different way, which would have been better, but you're not going to get crushed for it, And when people find out that they're empowered like that, you can take chances, and that's when you can really get some great things happening, when people feel freed to make those decisions and to react quickly. Like our customers will tell us what they need. If you listen to them, they will tell you what they need. When I was in sales and I used to go down to the procurement group down in Alpharetta, they would have a whole stack of orders on their desk, and I'd say, well, like, why don't you hand them to me? I can help you with those, and they go, really? And I remember actually going and like spreading out, and I said, well, I go, okay, put that in this pile. I can handle these easily. This pile, I have no idea what that is, but like, so basically every time I did it, I would take like half the pile off this one guy's desk and be like, I'll get these, right? And, and he was thrilled because like I was helping him do his job, and, things were happening. And, it's basically, being empowered to even like go down there and engage in that particular way. Just knowing, like, I didn't have to check in. It's like I was going to see my customer. I didn't have to get that approved by anybody or anything. Like, keep the customer happy, and they're gonna keep us happy.
So we got another interesting question from Charles, and I didn't ask this question of you before, so I don't know the answer. But do you still write content, formerly known as copy, which we could all relate to? And what's different now than 15 years ago? It's a good question.
It's a great question, and the hardest thing about my job now is that, so I when I started, I was the first person in the marketing group, and now there's 30 people, and I don't write anywhere near as much as I wanted to. And really the hardest thing is that, that when you get into speaking to people going into creative roles, you look at your calendar and you've got like meetings, and you might be meeting with HR, you might have an interview for an open position, and then you've got an hour and a half, and you're like, I'm going to be creative in that hour and a half, and I'm going to knock out some content or whatever. It's like, and then you get like 40 minutes into there, and you're like, man, nothing is flowing right now because I'm already sweating the next meeting that I got. It's one of the hardest things to do is that, and that's management in general. Like a lot of times, like your quote unquote like best employees get put into a management position, but like, are they still your best employees as managers, or are they, or were they your best employees because of what they were doing, before? And it's a different skill set, and trying to, a lot of times I think I could drive my team crazy because I'm like, oh, I want to write that. That's gonna be a good one. They're like, where is it? And I'm like, it's on its way. I'm telling you. So my team's like, can we just do it now? And it's like, yeah, you can. Sorry that I made you wait another day and a half because I thought that I was going to get to that. So it's balancing that, and balancing, like what, when you get later on in your career, like what you want to be working on versus what the company needs you to be working on. Like, nobody's going to tell you that. Like, that's, that's your job. Like, and you have to do it.
That's an important one. I don't want to gloss over that point, because I think that's a really rich one, right? As you right? Again, I think many people can relate to the fact that over the course of their career, they want to ascend to different levels of responsibility and tenure and senior roles. Sometimes you start to do more of what you have to do versus what you want to do. And I'm wondering about just your perspective on that. How has that sort of transition been for you over time, right? That as you've had to lead more people and have a bigger team, and it's sort of the changing work that you do. Maybe give us some quick thoughts around that, around how that changes and how that aligns with some of your goals, maybe, or changing goals.
Yeah, and that's one of the, so there's pros and cons of being at a company for 23 years, and one of the cons is that for this amount of time, I've never walked into work and had an empty inbox of emails, right? And actually letting things go. It's like, well, this is there's a lot of people at our company who have been here a long time and probably do things that they should have offloaded, a while ago, as they, continue to grow professionally and develop and their job evolves. So I've been very lucky where I've been at the same company, been able to do a couple of different positions. But the hardest thing to do, when you're like, I've never walked in, on day one of a job and you open the email and there's really not much there except maybe a couple of housekeeping things from HR. So, but I think what you have to do is you've got to find other things that you enjoy. And when you have one-on-ones with employees, especially like junior level employees or people who are early in career, like you've got to take some satisfaction in their success, and like genuinely in their success. And when I see a copy editor make edits that I know that I would have made, or like when I'd hear somebody like say something on the phone that I've said before, I give the old fist pump. I'm like, they got it. And you've got to really have value in that. And one of my favorite things to do, aside from my just nosy nature, is actually like try to identify people. Like, so if you see a skill set in different people, and then here we're still a pretty, I started 100 people, we're 5,000 now, but in general, we're still really good communicators and really navigate our company well. I actually feel bad for people coming from the outside because our departments are called, like, this is Ed's department, events is Janet's department, outside sales is Melissa's department. People are like, well, which one's Melissa, right? It's like, oh yeah, we forget, so, but being able to identify a skill set in an employee and actually matching them up with somebody who has a need is one of my absolute favorite things to do. And then you see them years later and they're flourishing in your career, and it's just because you maybe said, hey, you might want to apply for that position because and that it feels great. So I started out feeling great about writing things, but like if you're going to transition in your career, you've got to transition what makes you happy in career as well.
And so I think we're getting close on time, but I think this is important. We haven't really hit this one, and I want to make sure we get it.
Yep.
This idea of reinvention, right? As you continue to progress in your career, and you're there, right? You're at the top of your game. How do you continue to reinvent in your mind, right? How do you continue to what motivates you to be a better leader? What continues to sharpen the sword? What is it that keeps you pushing forward, both from a learning perspective and a growth perspective, and an engagement perspective? How do you continue to come and be the best you can be?
I think cheesy Larry Bird quote, surround yourself with good people and good things will happen, right? So probably said 100 times before that, but I heard Larry Bird say it one time. I truly believe that. I think if you don't hire well, everything else is much more difficult after that. And then if you're going to give yourself credit for hiring well, then you have to listen to the people that you hire, right? So in terms of being able to evolve, like there are so many times, I'm managing a team that has we've got people who are developing original content, but then we've got graphic designers who are supporting them. We've got a digital marketing team with social media who's getting that out there. People who are designing web pages. Every single person on my team knows more about what they need to do on their piece of the deliverable, and I've got to listen to them, and I've just got to support what they need, because you think to yourself, like, do I want to come to work and have this person not be here, right? It's like, no, I don't, so like that is motivation enough. Like if you're going to hire well, you got to listen to the people and you've got to make them as happy as you can like within your power.
I mean, which is not always an easy thing. I mean, being able to empower the people to do what they do well, right? And again, I think that my sense is that you've learned that lesson a bit from Ty. Ty seems to do a great job of empowering her leaders, and I think that you've kind of passed that on to your reports and so on and so forth. So that's really exciting to see. So last question here, Ed. If you could leave one nugget for people, what best piece of advice that you were that either you were given or picked up along the way that you'd like to pass on, what would that be?
I'll go with a quote, because I really tried to dig into the advice, and I was like, I'm not sure if I had that, but the quote is it's one by Coco Chanel. Actually, it says, "In order to be irreplaceable, one must always be different." Right? And when I hear that, I think to myself, if you're doing only what's expected of you, then you're going to rise to the level that people expect you to rise to, right? So I think that, like, there are some baselines, in terms of, we talked about being responsible before, like, that's the baseline. Like, those are things like, Chris Rock has the line where you don't get credit for doing things you're supposed to be doing, right? Like, of course, I'm paraphrasing if you've seen his act, but you don't get credit for doing things that you're supposed to be doing, and like, that's the baseline. But if you're really interested in just pursuing, whether it's at the same company or somewhere else, I think you've really got to take some chances and identify opportunities, and be willing to fill that. Like, don't identify an opportunity and then not be willing to do it, right? Because that you just pointed out a problem, and everybody points out a problem. That's the easiest thing in the world. What's the solution?
We need the solution. And let me just be the first to thank you for just the open, fun, and engaging conversation. This was really fun. Thank you for your time, your generosity. Let me turn it over to Margaret in case she has any other words, but just a true thank you. It's been a pleasure, not only personally getting to know you, but just sharing this time with you. A lot of fun. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Totally fun.
Thank you both, Ed and Peter. A great job helping us get to know, take a peek at the leadership playbook, and sharing successes and challenges that came throughout your journey. It's very helpful to our audience, which we could tell by some of the feedback that we were receiving throughout. So thanks to all of our audience contributors for thought-provoking questions, because that always enhances the dialogue. Just wanted to share with everyone a little bit of information about our very next Signature Leadership Series webinar, which will take place, look for it taking place on Thursdays at noon Eastern Time. We do have an exciting schedule of not just this one, but others coming in the next several months. You can always visit our website, which I'll say now, but we'll also be sharing with those who have registered, because it is a little long, business.rutgers.edu/alumni/lifelong-learning. And we do want our series to continue to meet your needs, so we ask that you please stay online very briefly. You'll receive just 2-question survey about today's event. And as I mentioned when our webinar began earlier, a link to the archived recording of the presentation will be shared via social media and emailed to you. It will also be on the Business Insights page of our website. So everyone, thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, Margaret. Thank you, Ed. Have a great day.
You too.
Thanks. Bye-bye.